get going.
A moment.
Sure. Just let me know. I'll be on mute.
We're ready in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Just let me know. I'll be on mute. Good afternoon to everyone, including my colleagues who joined. I'm Kenya McDuffie. I'm council member for Ward 5 and chair of the council's Committee on Business and Economic Development. Today is Wednesday, January 25th, 2022, and we're convening this roundtable virtually via Zoom. It's being streamed live at actually that's 3 W's, www.kenyamcduffie.ward5.com/live. The time is 12:08 p.m. and I'm calling to order this public roundtable. Today, the committee will consider a single measure, that's PR 24-389, the Chief Financial Officer of the District of Columbia, Fitzroy Lee Confirmation Resolution of 2021. As a reminder, witnesses testifying on their own behalf will have 3 minutes to provide oral testimony. And following testimony, council members will have 7 minutes for rounds of questions. All participants should please mute their microphones when they are not speaking. Proposed resolution 24-389, the Chief Financial Officer of the District of Columbia, Fitzroy Lee Confirmation Resolution of 2021, was introduced on October 4th, 2021 by Chairman Mendelson at the request of the mayor. It will confirm the appointment of Dr. Fitzroy Lee as the Chief Financial Officer, or the CFO of the District of Columbia. The appointment will be for the remainder of the unexpired term left vacant by the departure of Jeff DeWitt and will end on June 30th, 2022. Dr. Lee is the current acting CFO and has worked in the office of the Chief Financial Officer for about 2 decades. He began his career at the OCFO as Director of Revenue Estimation and Tax Research. Prior to his appointment last year as acting CFO, Dr. Lee served as the Deputy CFO and Chief Economist for the Office of Revenue Analysis. Dr. Lee has also worked as an economist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, as well as an assistant professor and lecturer at Tulane and Georgia State Universities. Dr. Lee earned a doctorate in economics from Georgia State University and bachelor's degree in applied physics and computer science from the University of the West Indies. I've worked with Dr. Lee for some time, both in his capacity as acting CFO and prior to that time. I have the utmost respect for him and know that he is a well-qualified, experienced candidate with the knowledge and skills to execute this role. However, I'm going to ask questions about the nominee selection process, as well as Dr. Lee's interest in this role and vision for the office, particularly considering how short the remainder of the term is. The district CFO is tasked with an awesome responsibility to manage the district's finances, which include its multi-billion-dollar operating capital budgets. While knowledge, skill, and experience is absolutely essential, leadership and vision are vital qualities for the CFO position. That said, the confirmation of a new CFO provides an opportunity to take stock of the agency's strengths and weaknesses and develop innovative approaches to improve its operations. For example, the Office of the CFO is responsible for preparing quarterly revenue estimates for the mayor and council, which help inform budget recommendations for the next fiscal year. With increasing revenue surpluses year after year, many have argued that the OCFO is too conservative in its revenue projections. The latest revenue estimates show that district is back to pre-pandemic levels. While that is encouraging news, critics question whether those funds would have been better spent on relief programs to meet the need of district residents and small businesses. I plan to discuss these concerns with Dr. Lee and ask about his vision for the OCFO under his leadership. With that, I am going to turn to my colleagues to see if either of them have a brief opening statement. I see we've been joined by council members, both at-large council members, Christina Henderson and Alyssa Silverman. I see first, Christina Henderson has turned her camera on. So I'm going to turn to you, and good afternoon to you, council member.
Good afternoon, Chairman McDuffie, and to all the witnesses. I'm not a member of this committee, but obviously the CFO position is super important. So I have a really brief opening statement. Dr. Lee, thank you for being here today and congratulations on your nomination. The value of the Office of the Chief Financial Officer cannot be understated. The CFO assists with budget formulation and through both revenue estimation and ensuring we have adequate funds within agencies to ensure the operations of government. CFO's office also collects our tax revenue from payroll to real property and everything in between, so we can harness that revenue to make capital investments and secure bonds to do so. The CFO also has the not easy job of projecting costs of legislation, tax abatements, and the future of the district's economy. So there are a lot of responsibilities here, but all of them are to protect the financial position of the District of Columbia with independence and integrity. The key being both independence and integrity. And so I actually have some questions today that will specifically center on those two things, especially as the relationship between the Office of the Chief Financial Officer with the Council and the Executive. I look forward to our discussion and how we can work together to continue to protect the financial position of the District of Columbia, its taxpayers, workers, and visitors. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you, Councilmember Henderson. As I mentioned, we also have been joined by at-large Councilmember Alyssa Silverman. Councilmember Silverman, would you like an open statement?
I would, Councilmember McDuffie. Thank you. Good to see you. And hello to Councilmember Henderson and Dr. Lee and everyone watching. So thank you, Councilmember McDuffie, for holding this hearing, and good afternoon to you, Dr. Lee. So I'll just begin by saying that an independent CFO is a very important institution in our very unique government. I do think the district greatly benefits from having an independent CFO, and we benefit from the work of economists like Dr. Lee. But every year, as he knows, when the CFO testifies before the council, I express concern over the accuracy of our revenue estimates. And of course, as an appropriator of those tax dollars, I want to use the contributions from our residents and businesses and visitors, as optimally as possible to help our city. And I understand that Dr. Lee, who has led the revenue estimation team for quite some time, wants to make sure we are not being irrationally exuberant in our expectations. So I understand there's always a tension here, but I want to acknowledge we all have the same goal of making sure that we are responsible and sensible in the allocation of tax dollars to meet our needs. So forecasting revenue has a little bit maybe in common with forecasting the weather. Both are a little unpredictable, and they're somewhat of educated guesses, and they shape the actions that people take. So I just want to note that last week, many people remember that all the meteorologists said it's going to snow. And there was a behavioral reaction, which is schools canceled or delayed. I think we sensibly delayed, and almost all of our neighbors canceled. And then it turned out to be a bust. It was just rain. And so people like me who really love the Capital Weather Gang said, what the hell? And Capital Weather Gang, to their credit, said, here's what happened. They did like an after action report, so to speak, to say this is why we were so off. And so I'm hoping we can work together, Dr. Lee, on something like that in the future when it comes to revenue estimates, because as much as the weather does impact our behavior, like school closings and snow plowing and so forth, the stakes are a little temporary. It's a few days. Whereas when DC's revenue estimates are off by hundreds of millions of dollars, to me, that's a much bigger deal, right? So this impacts how many housing vouchers we can give working families in our city, how many schools have librarians, how much mental health services we can give to our residents at this time, especially when there's so much trauma. So, I hope that we can work together on something like this. So I'm going to spend a fair amount of time, Councilmember McDuffie, asking about revenue estimates. And as I said, I know it's tricky, but it really does impact what kind of services we can deliver to our residents and businesses. Let me just say one more thing before I conclude, which is, we've had a string of really sound financial practices. Every year CFO comes before us. I think we're in the two decades of, balanced budget, clean financial audit, and certainly we have very good bond ratings, which help us borrow money at a very cheap rate. So I think that we need new goals. And I'm interested in hearing from Dr. Lee what he thinks those might be, because we got that fiscal responsibility down. But other things that I just will mention is often when I'm working with an agency, the independence of the CFOs, I sometimes question it. I will be honest with you. It seems like the CFO is taking the agency's side. And that seems to defy the independence a little bit. I'm happy to talk more about that in the question and answer period. But I think the independence is critical. So I look forward to the hearing and the questions of my colleagues and the answers from Dr. Lee. Thank you so much, Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Councilmember Silverman. We have one witness who has signed up to testify, and that is Liz DeBarros, who is the CEO of the District of Columbia Building Industry Association. I appreciate you joining us this morning, Mr. DeBarros, and we do have your testimony, and you can begin your testimony whenever you're ready. Thanks.
Oh, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chair McDuffie, Councilmember Henderson, Councilmember Silverman, members of the Committee on Business and Economic Development, and staff. My name is Liz DeBarros, and I am Interim Chief Executive Officer of the DCBIA. I'm also a resident of Ward 7. DCBIA is the leading voice of real estate development in the District of Columbia. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of Fitzroy Lee's confirmation. The CFO plays a vital role in ensuring the economic well-being of the district by forecasting revenue and measuring fiscal impacts to form the basis of the district's annual budget, certifying the budget year, and providing independent economic analysis. The position of the CFO is critical to the district successfully navigating crises like the COVID-19 pandemic. We have long depended on the CFO's leadership for prudent fiscal management and advice to ensure that the district maintains a strong financial position and does not have to resort to policies that undermine our competitiveness, such as service cuts and tax increases. Further, on the day-to-day basis as practitioners in all facets of real estate development industry, our members regularly engage with the CFO across multiple offices, including the Office of Tax and Revenue, OTR. We have a shared interest in growing the district's economy and advancing important policy goals while making efficient use of the CFO's resources. DCBIA strongly supports the nomination of Acting Chief Financial Officer Lee as the permanent CFO. His qualifications are undeniable, having served more than 2 decades with the Office of Revenue Analysis, first as Director of Revenue Estimation and Tax Research, and then as Deputy CFO and Chief Economist. He has expertise on tax policy and a valuable perspective on the district's long-term economic health, which is precisely what leaders need from their independent CFO. Acting CFO Lee has a record of listening and collaborating with stakeholders during his nearly year-long tenure as CFO. We have re-engaged our DCBIA OCFO working group, which enables our members and agency staff to work together directly to identify and resolve issues so that we can achieve common goals. The CFO has also held its annual Business Association Advisory Meeting to hear feedback directly from the private sector. Further, the CFO staff have been available to answer questions, solicit feedback, and work through issues as they arise. We look forward to Dr. Lee's confirmation as permanent CFO so that we can continue working together to ensure the agency functions at a high level. We have several specific goals in the near term. On the pending proposed rules on the combination of division of lots, OTR has proposed rules requiring a confirmatory deed when a division of lots application is filed that pertains to a lot of divided interest. We have been working closely with OTR to address our concerns, including the proposed enforcement mechanism of automatic cancellation of the combination of or division of lots if the deed is not filed within 30 days. If the proposed provision is not changed, it will alarm investors and slow or even stop economic development projects. Improving the tax refund process. Members have reported that refund process is slow and that it is difficult to attain information after a refund request is submitted online. It would be useful if the system provided status updates and a point of contact so that taxpayers can readily understand the status of their request. Ensuring a coordination between OTR and DCRA. These two agencies must work together in a number of areas, but lack of coordination creates costly confusion for taxpayers. For example, DCRA is often delayed in reporting blighted property to OTR, resulting in belated tax bills. Further, DCR indexes properties by address and OTR uses square and lot numbers, which creates some ambiguity and confusion. OTR also issues statements of accounts to taxpayers that are difficult to understand and sometimes incorrect or conflicting, which creates confusion and costs for taxpayers. We appreciate the CFO's efforts to improve the online customer portal for real property tax matters, which launched about a year ago. However, our members have experienced challenges such as search functionality, accessing past tax bills and property and tax history details. I'm going to close up soon. While the CFO does not directly control the Real Property Tax Appeals Commission, it has shared interest in efficient disposition of appeals and can be a powerful advocate for ensuring that RIPTAC is adequately resourced. So I'd be happy to answer any questions Chair McDuffie you might have in greater detail. We're confident that under Dr. Lee's continued leadership, that we'll be able to work together to resolve these issues and other challenges to ensure the public is well served by the CFO. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
And thank you, Mr. Barros, for your testimony. And I appreciate you laying out some pretty specific concerns. Have you raised, has DCBIA raised these specific concerns already with the Office of the Chief Financial Officer or Dr. Lee in particular, to your knowledge?
Yeah, all of these issues have been brought up with Dr. Lee. We've had several engagements with him as well as members of his staff, particularly in the last 3 or 4 months on these. So we do feel like we're making a lot of progress to get to the right point where these issues can be addressed.
Okay, and now is there, I don't know how you've outlined them, whether or not there's any sense of priority, but if some of these things, are they longer term, more persistent issues that your members have been dealing with that just haven't gotten an adequate resolution, or are these more recent? Obviously, I think with the website and some of the new things that have been rolled out by the CFO, but is there anything that jumps out in terms of trying to get a resolution to rather quickly because of how long the issue has existed? It doesn't have to be the case. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, some of these are, some longer standing issues, but I think it's also changes, with a new system comes that's outlined. We have to work closely and see where some issues could come up. And we've been engaging with his office pretty regularly on those. I think the issue with the proposed rules that is on the table right now, I mean, we're going through the formal process that the CFO would put out on proposed rules. And that conversation has been wonderful. And we actually had time to sit with his staff and go through in the general counsel's office to go through some of the very technical and even legal concerns. And it's been a good engagement. And we look forward to resolving that one.
Okay. I don't have any additional questions. I appreciate your testimony, and I want to be careful not to turn this confirmation roundtable into a performance oversight hearing. There'll be time for that, and we already have a schedule for that. So maybe your members have already decided you're going to testify there, which we encourage. the public to do. But I will ask Dr. Lee about some of the things that you outlined here, since they're items that have already been raised with the office. So thank you, Mr. Barros.
All right, thank you.
Oh, you know what? Before you go, I'm sorry. I want to see if any of my colleagues have questions for you. I don't see either of them, Councilmember Silverman or Henderson. I'll turn to Henderson. No, okay, Silverman shaking her hand in the negative. They both are. Okay, all right, thank you, Mr. Barros.
All right, thank you all. It's good to see you, Dr. Lee. Thank you too.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Now we're going to turn, in fact, to Dr. Lee for questions. I'm going to begin with a round of 7 minutes, and I'll turn to my colleagues in the order that they provided opening statements with Councilmember Henderson, followed by Councilmember Silverman. And I'm going to start with some standard questions, Dr. Lee, that I ask of all.
Councilmember, did you want me to read the testimony, or we just move into the questions?
That's actually pretty important. Maybe I just jump right into it because you previously provided your testimony and I've already read it. But yeah, let's give you an opportunity to read your testimony document, and then we'll turn to questions.
Okay. All right, thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman McDuffie and members of the Committee on Business and Economic Development. I'm Fitzroy Lee, Acting Chief Financial Officer for the District of Columbia. I'm honored that Mayor Bowser has nominated me for appointment as the Chief Financial Officer of the District of Columbia to fill the remainder of an unexpired term ending June 30th, 2022. I am pleased to appear before you today to discuss my qualifications, experience, and vision for this position. As you know, I was appointed Interim Chief Financial Officer by Mayor Bowser in March 2021, when the previous CFO, Jeff DeWitt, left the district to start a new job. Before the appointment, I served in the Office of the Chief Financial Officer for 20 years, starting in 2001 as the Director of Revenue Estimation in the Office of Revenue Analysis. I was promoted to Deputy Chief Financial Officer and Chief Economist for ORA in October 2009. Prior to joining the OCFO, I was an Assistant Professor of Economics at Tulane University in New Orleans, and before that, an economist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I hold a Bachelor of Science degree in Applied Physics and Computer Science from the University of the West Indies, Jamaica, and earned my PhD in Economics at the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies at Georgia State University, specializing in the fields of public finance and econometrics. My tenure of 20 years with OCFO has certainly prepared me to be the Chief Financial Officer of the district. As Director of Revenue Estimation in ORA from July 2001 to October 2009, I was fortunate to lead an excellent group of economists and policy analysts who developed the baseline revenue estimate that is the basis for the district's budget. During my time leading the team, we improved the revenue forecasting and tax policy analysis functions in several ways. We developed and implemented statistical models to improve the forecasting accuracy of the major tax sources, created a database of monthly collection of the major taxes, which facilitated quarterly update of the revenue estimates, developed procedures to improve data quality prior to revenue estimated, developed procedures and techniques for estimating the fiscal impact of tax policy legislation, created a comprehensive data warehouse for the major taxes, and developed and implemented a microsimulation model for estimating the impact on revenue and distribution of income of individual income tax policy changes. Leadership is demonstrated and tested in difficult situations and times of crisis. In this regard, I led the OCFO revenue estimating team through two major economic shocks to the district after the end of the control period. The first came after the events of September 11th, and the bursting of the dot-com bubble. In the summer of 2002, a forecast by the revenue estimating team alerted the mayor and council to a $323 million revenue shortfall in the fiscal year 2003 budget, just before the start of the fiscal year. The early warning minimized disruptions to the district's budget as policymakers were able to rebalance the budget before its submission to Congress. But more importantly, district policymakers' timely adjustment to the budget avoided a budget deficit at the end of the fiscal year, one of the events that can trigger a return to a control board. The second economic shock was a consequence of the bursting of the housing market bubble. Starting in September 2008, right after the collapse of Lehman Brothers and just before the start of fiscal year 2009, the revenue estimating team revised the fiscal year 2009 revenue estimate downward 4 times, reducing the estimate by a total of almost $600 million. As the recession, now termed the Great Recession, entered a second year, and as the recovery turned sluggish, the revenue estimating team revised the revenue estimate downward several more times. Policymakers responded to each downward revision of the revenue estimate with the budget actions that maintain budget balance, and the district emerged from this period of severe fiscal stress without a single year of budget deficit. As Deputy CFO and Chief Economist for ORA, I had the privilege of leading an exceptional and highly motivated team of economists and fiscal analysts. In addition to performing their routine functions of revenue estimation, fiscal impact analyses, and publication of special reports, the ORA team has frequently employed their analytical expertise to produce research and studies to facilitate policymaking process. Some major accomplishments include research and analysis to support the 2012 and 2013 DC Tax Revision Commission, fiscal and economic analysis of federal tax cuts and Jobs Act, research and analysis to support the work of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments' efforts to secure regional financing for capital maintenance program for Metro, tax expenditure evaluation reports that the Pew Charitable Trust deemed high quality valuations, recession scenario analysis and contingency planning, which facilitated a rapid response to the recession triggered by the COVID pandemic. My leadership of ORA gave me a unique vantage point to learn the breadth of both OCFO operations and the district government. Forecasting tax revenue requires a very detailed understanding of the tax system and the flow of tax receipts throughout the year. Accordingly, ORA works very closely with the Office of Tax and Revenue as it prepares the revenue forecast. The revenue estimate starts the budget process, and the fiscal impact statement certifies the final version of the budget. This requires close coordination with the Office of Budget and Planning during the budget development cycle. Fiscal impact statements issued throughout the year also require close coordination with OBP, associate CFOs, and agency fiscal officers, as well as agency program and council staff. ORA also works closely with the Office of Financial Operation and Systems to produce the annual financial report, and with the Office of Finance and Treasury for bond issuances and discussions with the ratings agency. It has almost been a year since I assumed the role of the CFO. Since that time, I have gained a much greater appreciation of my colleagues on the OCFO executive team, many of whom I have known and worked with for many years. They're consummate problem solvers, detail-oriented, but with a full appreciation of the big picture. Their dedication, commitment, competence, and professionalism are what make the OCFO a high-performance organization. It is why we're able year after year to certify and maintain a balanced budget and 5-year financial plan, and why, unlike many other jurisdictions, the district is not facing a looming fiscal cliff when the unprecedented amount of federal dollars now pouring into the district coffers disappear in the next 2 years. A high-functioning executive team is also why we will have an annual report which will almost certainly show that we ended another fiscal year financially strong, with a clean audit and balanced budget. My predecessors built a solid financial foundation and an institutional framework that includes an annual balanced budget and financial plan, 25 years of clean audits and budget surpluses, high level of reserves, strong bond ratings, sustainable debt levels, and fully funded pension and other post-employment benefits. The district's financial resilience in the face of the pandemic is a testament to this solid foundation. Like the first do no harm Hippocratic oath of medical practitioners, my first priority as the district CFO is to ensure that we maintain the district's hard-won financial strength. A very close second is strengthening the resilience of both the city finances and the OCFO against future shocks. The pandemic has shown how such shocks can upend our businesses, daily lives, and communities virtually overnight. So, as we navigate an uncertain post-pandemic world, we must prepare for other disruptive events such as future pandemics, cyber attacks, extreme weather events, and financial crises. This will require efforts on 2 fronts. First, ensuring that the district finances can withstand or recover quickly from a disruptive event. The surest way to financial resilience is having an adequate level of reserve, 2, sustainable debt levels, and 3, routine ongoing recession and contingency planning. The second front is strengthening the OCFO's organizational resilience. We must continue to innovate and implement policies, procedures, and systems that ensure that the organization will be able to operate during a crisis and then rebound quickly to full strength after the crisis is over. Initiatives to strengthen the OCFO's resilience include continued modernization of our critical financial systems and cybersecurity infrastructure, full implementation of an enterprise risk management program, continued development of OCFO staff from recruitment and training to succession planning, continued investments to improve taxpayers' customer service experience, and continued promotion of the smarter values and culture of continuous improvement. I want to take this opportunity to thank Mayor Bowser once again for her confidence in me and the opportunity to serve the District of Columbia. I also want to thank the staff of the OCFO for all their accomplishment over the years, and especially for their commitment to serving the residents of the District of Columbia in the face of a global pandemic, which has so disrupted our lives and our communities, and even take the lives of our loved ones. Their level of dedication and professionalism is extraordinary. They are the heart of the district's financial resilience. Finally, thank you, Mr. Chairman, the committee, and other members of the Council of the District of Columbia for your consideration of my nomination. I consider it an honor and a privilege to serve the District of Columbia. This concludes my remarks. I would be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
And thank you for your testimony. Dr. Lee, I do have some questions, and I'm going to pick up where I started before you provide the testimony. We are going to have 7-minute rounds for the members who would like to ask questions, and I'm going to begin my questions with the standard questions that I ask nominees before the committee, and then we'll take it from there. Have you been, or are you currently, a member of any district government board or commission?
I am a board member on the Events DC board.
Okay. Do you or any member of your immediate family have any interests, financial or otherwise, that may directly or indirectly pose a conflict of interest for you in the performance of your duties?
No.
Okay. I don't think this applies, but I'll ask, are you an attorney?
No.
Okay. Do you have any outstanding liability for taxes, fees, or other payments to the district, federal, state, or other local government, either contested or uncontested?
No.
And in the past 5 years, have you engaged in any local political activity, including campaign contributions to district candidates or political committees?
No.
Okay. Are you a district resident?
No.
Okay, so if you're confirmed as a CFO, it's going to be for the remainder of the unexpired term vacated by Mr. DeWitt, as I mentioned in my opening statement, which is going to, it's at the end June 30th, 2022. So that's only 6 months from now. I think this is an important question to ask. Are you interested in continuing to serve for another term once this term expires?
To be perfectly honest, this is something that's an ongoing discussion in my family, and I have not decided the answer to that question yet.
So you have not at this point determined whether you have any plans to move to the district?
What I would say is that, you know, if I am confirmed, I plan to comply with all the requirements for the position.
Okay. All right. I appreciate you answering those questions. Let me skip down to the next section. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about your the mission and vision. I know you talked some about this in your testimony. It may be slightly redundant, but I want to make sure we have a nice record for my colleagues who don't have an opportunity to participate. I know Your predecessor, Jeff DeWitt, had a reputation for being a responsible and effective chief financial officer, whose leadership, I think, has been credited for, at least in recent years, the district having achieved its reserve goals and attaining AAA credit rating. On the other hand, some critics felt he was too conservative with revenue estimates, and others have argued that the office of the chief financial officer's fiscal impact statements overestimate costs, especially for bills related to financial support or debt relief. What kind of CFO will you be? Will you maintain the existing policies and the status quo with the agency, or do you have plans to make any specific changes or improvements as you see?
So let me start off by addressing the concern about the revenue estimating. So the revenue estimates, as you know, are made almost 18 months before the execution of the year in which the budget is executed. What I will say is that the surpluses, so when we make our revenue forecast, we're doing it with the information that we have at the time of the forecast. And I would say that the surpluses that we observe from year to year are an inevitable consequence of a revenue forecast that more than anything else aims to avoid a budget deficit. What this means is that we do not build into our long-term forecasts the revenue booms of volatile revenue sources, like those from capital gains, real estate transactions. We get D-taxes from real estate transactions, and business profits. These are very, and year after year, if you look, Councilmember Silverman referred to, something like an after-action report, and we do that every year. And we will do it again this year when we unveil the annual financial report. And you will see that most of the surpluses are coming from these very volatile sources. And it would be hard for us with looking at the long-term financial integrity to build into our long-term forecast capital gains and business profits revenue. And so when those happen year after year, you'll find that they result in the surplus. So that is the genesis of the surpluses that we usually see, that it's coming from volatile revenue forecasts.
Okay, what about some of the income tax revenues as well? Hasn't that helped to drive some of the?
Right, and those, when I say the capital gains, that's one component of the income tax. So one component of the income tax. We have the ones from withholding that come from wages, and then the component that comes from capital gains is usually responsible for a large portion of it. What I'll say this year, withholding also contributed, but that's because when we were building the forecast, we did not anticipate. Remember when we built this, the forecast for this year, and I'm just addressing this year's forecast now. When we built that forecast, it was in the depths. Remember, it was April of 2020 when we built a forecast that we'll see when we look at the results for 2021. And at that time, we were in the depths of the pandemic. Everything was closed down, and we couldn't have anticipated the massive federal response that helped to, buoy wages and salaries. And so that has been one component of that. It's coming because the district didn't fall in terms of personal income and wages because of the floor that the federal injection of stimulus provided.
Yeah, but I know I'm over my time, but I want to really hone in on this. And so we're going to spend a little time on this, and I anticipate my colleagues may have some questions about revenue estimates too. Given what you said, and notwithstanding what you said, I'm interested to know whether you think there needs to be any adjustments to the methodology. I appreciate what you said about capital gains and the unpredictability about that and deregulation taxes. But when you think about the pretty consistent surpluses that we've seen during this pandemic, you take the December revision, what is it, 264.7 million over the prior revenue estimate, and that September revision was 311,300,000 surplus over the budgeted revenues. And so, it seems to be a trend here. And I would like to know how you all are adjusting or adapting the methodology to account for what seems to be a trend. And I know the federal funds came in and we didn't know whether we were going to get them. And then we had fewer funds than we thought we would get and push for the additional 700 plus million. But you know how high the stakes are for people who are at the lowest end of our socioeconomic ladder in the District of Columbia. And they're really dependent on our officials to get things right the first time around, because for many of them, they don't have a lot of second chances to support themselves and their families. Small businesses that were closed, they depended on the relief that they got. And I know it was largely driven by federal funds, but we have some local funds that we used to support these businesses and these families as well. And I gotta hear a little bit. I'm gonna push you a little bit more on this, right? So I'm started on my round. You can respond if you have anything you want to respond to what I just.
No, that's fair. And as I said, if you looked at those revenue forecasts, both in September and the one we did in December, I would say 80 to 90% of the revenues are coming from, really three places: business income taxes, which is dependent on business profits, capital gains, and some from wages and salaries. And I, explained the wages and salaries was just, if you looked at where personal income was when we made the original forecast and where it ended up, it was a surprise to us. But usually I would say in most years, wages and salaries, or the withholding tax, is not a surprise to us. The big components in prior years have been capital gains and business profits, and in some years, D-taxes, because as you know, the D-taxes are based on the sale of real property, commercial properties. There's some years when what we have are the sale of one high-valued property, and that could add as much as 100 million to our coffers. There's no way we, in our revenue forecast, will be anticipating that kind of sale. And it's the same with capital gains. So the stock market, over the last, what I will say to you that I can say no forecaster at the time we were building this the revenue forecast on which the 21 budget was based, would have anticipated that the stock market, given where we were, would have done as well as it did. But it did. I mean, there were a lot of tech stocks that thrived during the pandemic. And the stock market, when we stopped the forecast in February of 2020, we decided not to do the forecast and wait. It was because the stock market had fallen almost 20%. And so for us to anticipate that we would have a stock market that thrived over that period, we would have had to be wizards in some way. So what I'm saying to you is that there's some components of our revenue system that are very, very volatile. And, you ask about improvements. And what I can tell you as somebody who was the director of revenue estimation is that we have been continuously refining the method because we try as much as possible. But I'll tell you, it's really hard, especially when it comes to the stock market, to look at the boom this year and make a guess as to what it will be doing in the next year. And so that has really been, and the D-tax is another component that always adds to that.
Okay. I'll let you, I know I went over my time, but I was hoping that my colleagues would want to hear the benefit of your response to my last question. Let me turn now to Councilmember Henderson for a round. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDuffie. And yes, I only have time probably for one round because I have to get over to Ward 8. But I wanted to ask some questions about how you envision yourself as a leader of the agency, because I know that Councilmember Silverman is going to dig in deeper on some of the methodology and the pieces around forecasting, et cetera. But So, when I was a staffer at the council, and this also sort of continued after I left, there are occasionally these tensions that arise between the CFO's office and the council and the mayor. And one of the things that I talked about in my opening was around independence and the integrity piece. And I know that this can sometimes be difficult, but sometimes there is this view that if the mayor's office doesn't want to do something, they use their fiscal impact statement as just an impediment to getting something done. So they'll say, oh, it's going to cost us $20 billion. And then all of a sudden we've blown it up. And so I'm curious about your observations about the relationship and what steps you plan to take to mitigate this perception of favoritism, especially when it comes to some of this. Is it empowering some of the revenue staff to push back on some of the estimates that come from the mayor's office? I'm just curious how you plan to proceed here.
Yeah. Thanks for that question, Council Member. So, again, I, led the Office of Revenue Analysis for several years, so I understand that dilemma. Now, one of the things that we promise both the mayor's staff and council members is that, when there's a bill, we talk to them in private, and we do the same for council members. So people are not able to observe the back and forth that we have just as much as we have with the council. We have that with the mayor's staff. So whenever they give us an estimate for the cost of something, we in fact do our due diligence. We looked at the cost of similar items to the extent that we can get it from other jurisdictions. We looked at data from the past. We work with the agents of fiscal officers in those agencies and the analysts from the Office of Budget and Planning. And we do our best to make sure that what we're given is our estimate, not the mayor's estimate or the council estimate, our estimate of what is a reasonable estimate of the cost of that. So part of the perception comes from the fact that you don't observe that there is a back and forth with the mayor, and just as much as you might feel that the cost we're giving you, they also feel a lot of times, I can tell you that from lots of angry calls, that we're not giving them a reasonable cost of that program. So I think we maintain our independence in that regard, and I can tell you we've had many fights, but the perception comes from the fact that you're not observing that we go through this back and forth many times.
Okay. I'm gonna hold you to that, because I know that we probably have
and the
upcoming.
other thing the other thing we also have to guard against in this regard is that if say we tell them to absorb a cost that they can't absorb, on the back end, it's going to turn into, or it potentially could turn into spending pressure later on that we have to address. So we have to be mindful of that as well. So it's not,
sure,
we don't take their word for it for sure, but we also have to be mindful that the cost of any legislation our estimate has to be realistic.
No, I totally understand that. And I think I could appreciate sometimes this is going to cause a budget pressure, except for at the end of the fiscal year, we always routinely have agencies who are returning dollars back. So it would be one thing if, agency A always ran out of money because of X, Y, or Z, but that never happens. So that's neither here nor there.
And this is why, as I mentioned, we look at the history as well, because the history is very important, as you quite rightly pointed out.
Okay. I want to ask about the CFO's relationship to perhaps other agencies or independent bodies. This one might be this one is very fresh for me. What is the relationship between the CFO's office and the DC Retirement Board?
So we do have an ex officio member. Our treasurer is an ex officio member on the retirement board, and that's as far as it goes. Only because the funds that they manage are a component of our overall financial system, and so the treasurer is there more as an observer than anything else.
Okay. So there's no additional agency or there's no additional CFO oversight in terms of the financial books or accounting practices of the retirement board?
No, it's a completely independent, I forgot what the term is, but an independent agency from us.
Okay.
We don't have if you're asking, we don't have a fiscal officer or a CFO in that agency, in that entity.
Okay. Okay. We'll save some questions for them on that later. You've been working at the CFO's, with my last little 4 seconds here, you've been working at the CFO's office for a while now. Are there any programs or divisions that you would like to see enhanced or better supported, or you feel like can be strengthened under your leadership? I know this is a really awkward question because now you're going to have to critique your former colleagues, but I'm just curious in terms of where you see the office going.
No, it's not necessarily a critique because, as I mentioned in the testimony, and this is not just me, it was my predecessor. We have built a culture of continuous improvement. So it's not that everything is perfect and everything is running. Liz DeBarris testify about some challenges when we bring on new system, and it's not even new system, old system, and we've been working as a team to improve. As I said in my testimony, one of my objective is to continue to invest, improving the customer service, because we want to have a organization where when the taxpayer and the residents of the district interacts with the agency, they come away with a great customer experience, and we're working to make improvements in that area. But in general, my vision of I think Councilmember Silverman said this in our opening statement, that we have routinely produced budget surpluses and clean annual financial reports and all of that. But I think, given coming out of a pandemic, which hit us really hard, I think, and this is if you ask my vision, is to continue to build resilience so that it's not just we do these routinely, but when we're hit like shocks, and we know, with the oncoming climate change is wreaking havoc with the weather. We know that, cyber attacks is now a thing. I mean, we get it. So my vision is to build the organization so that it is resilience when it's resilient when these shocks come. And so that's the area. It's customer service improvement and building the resilience of the organization.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. Councilmember Silverman.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Lee, I want to pursue Councilmember McDuffie's line of questioning on the revenue estimates. So you said there is an after action, so to speak, and if I'm understanding you correctly, that's the yearly certified financial audit. But I'm interested more in the quarterly revenue estimates. As Councilmember McDuffie asked, and so I'm going to ask again, are there any adjustments made? Adjustments perhaps to the assumptions. When a December estimate for the previous fiscal year comes in nearly 300 million above previous estimates, it seems like are you saying that every quarterly forecast is like discrete? But it seems we've been, and I understand what you're saying is there's a lag time, but we've been in the COVID period for unfortunately quite some time. And so assumptions at the beginning of COVID are not true now.
Right. So, so let me explain that first, why I went back to the COVID what you will see in the annual financial report is a budget. It's comparing where we are now to a budget that was built 18 months ago. And so I'm relating the assumptions because, so coming to you to answer your question about each quarterly revenue estimate, they're in fact not discrete, and each quarterly, the timing for those quarterly estimate are strategic in that we're looking at when we get information. So when we approach each quarterly revenue estimate, we're looking at how has the economic environment changed since we last did the estimate. And the second part of it is what can we observe in the tax collection? Mm-hmm. So in February, for example, when we do the estimate at end of February, what we will have in the way of information is the assessment for the real property tax. So that will be a key component of informing that estimate. When we do the one in June, what we will know then is what has happened to returns that have come in during the April. And so each estimate is taking what we have learned from the collections and from what we have seen in the economic environment. And and that is what informs the estimate. For example, the December estimate that Councilmember McDuffie referred to, the reason we were able to update that in terms of income tax is that we know that in October, we get the final returns from extension payments. And we also get estimated payments from corporate returns. So when we look at that, we saw that whatever the information we had in September, the revenue coming in were much more. So we're looking each time at what information we have. The problem is, for example, when we alert you in September to the updated revenue estimate, there's no way for you to reflect that in the budget. So by the time we get to the annual financial report, you're going to see whatever information we have gained from those quarterly revenue estimate, it's going to look like a surplus. And so that's what we're stuck with. That when after you've built the budget, you don't have a lot of time to incorporate the updated forecast in the budget.
So the sands of time are disappearing for me, and I have a few other questions, but I'm just going to say that, as you noted, I think at the beginning of of COVID, stock market took a hit, and then it became very robust again. I think, as you said, because of tech and real estate. I think I know that just because of my pension fund or my 401a. But it seems like there are never adjustments made to say, actually, the stock, we're going to see higher capital gains. Also, because, we didn't see such an income tax drop, and actually people were paying their property taxes. The big hit, as I remember it, from the beginning of COVID was the sales tax decline because of our hospitality industry. But I'm going to move on because I have other questions, because I'm in problem solving mode here, Dr. Lee. So I understand the biggest goal always is avoiding a deficit. We do not want to be financially deficient. But is there something we can do, for example, in these like when we hit uncertainty, to have a revenue stabilization fund that's different than our other reserve funds? But just to say, I mean, since I've been in office, we've always had a budget surplus. Like the estimates have always come in not maybe way below, but below or above, above what the actual revenue, the actual revenues came in above the estimates. So is there a way for us to be able to optimize our revenue more? In that I understand you're playing defense on financial deficiency, but in the end, as Councilmember McDuffie said, and I think Councilmember Henderson said, and I said, that then it limits what we can do to help those who need the help the most right away. So is there a way that we can still play very good defense on being financially deficient, but be able to optimize our revenues more and get a little closer, be a little less conservative, I guess?
So, you mentioned the idea of a stabilization fund. And if I remember correctly, we do have a fiscal stabilization fund, which is one of the reserve fund. Now, the question, and it's a problem. I alluded to that as we're updating the revenue estimate on a quarterly basis, and this is something we can explore. But the idea is, how do you incorporate that into an ongoing budget? So it's there, and we say in the middle of the pandemic, we realized there's a fiscal stimulus, because we did reflect that. We realized, in late 2020 that our personal income was higher than we had anticipated. All of that was reflected in our revenue estimate. So I think the question you're asking is, as we update that estimate, how can it be incorporated more quickly into the budget? And I don't have the answer to that. And it's something that I think both the mayor and the council would have to work out in terms of how you do that, because we can't, as the OCFO, unilaterally, incorporate those into a budget and financial plan. But we do provide the information for both the mayor and the council to take action in that regard.
Okay, I'm out of time on this round, but we'll pursue a little bit more Councilmember Henderson's questions on the fiscal impact statements in the next round. Thank you,
Sure.
Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Councilmember Silverman. I went into questions about the revenue estimates, but I still have some questions about mission and vision that I want to cover. So I want to get back to the revenue estimates, but I want to give you an opportunity to perhaps share with the public and the council, what your vision is for the office, and if you could highlight ways that you think things might be different than what they've been. I think you benefit, and the city, frankly, has benefited from your experience, given how long your tenure has lasted. So you bring, I think, some historical knowledge and context to the role. But given some of the concerns that have been raised about revenue estimates, I'd love for you to share, what qualities and professional experience you think the city would most benefit from by having you as the CFO.
So what I would say is that I bring to this role a deep understanding of the purpose of the OCFO in ensuring the long-term financial viability of the district. And we do that not as an end in itself, but it as a way to maximize the resources that are available to policymakers to fund the important priorities that meet the needs of district residents. So that is my first goal, is that in terms of what I bring to the role, is that I do understand this from, as you said, my many years of being a part of the OCFO. As the chief economist for over a decade, I also bring to the role skills that can help us navigate the current economic challenges and the uncertainties that will come with a post-pandemic world. And, I just referred briefly to this in my testimony that, I became an economist after, maybe a first career as a person in IT. And so one of the things that in terms of our vision is to, modernize our critical IT infrastructure. And so in terms of that, I will be a valuable asset as we embark on, several technology modernization initiatives that we're engaged in right now.
So I'm gonna have some questions about the IT, because I know it's a big endeavor, the systems that have been implemented, and I know that it has helped to modernize things for the district, but I also think it came with some adjustments that the public is still trying to get used to, and it's brought a number of questions to the committee about information that they don't have access to that they used to under the old system and so forth. So I'm going to come back to that. I don't want to deviate just yet. I do want to ask you, just to be clear, have you agreed, or do you agree, are you committing to serve the remainder of this unexpired term?
Yes.
You confirm? Okay. And want to give you an opportunity just to be clear about this and make sure the record is complete. Because some people might ask, why do you want this job? You know, given the position you had tenure, why do you want this job?
So one thing I'll say, when I was asked by the mayor to serve in this role, it was another opportunity for me to serve in a different capacity in an organization that I have had the good fortune to be a part of for the past 20 years. I do see the OCFO as an institution that has been a key contributor to the district's renaissance over the last quarter of a century. I believe my serving in this role at this moment in time will bring a measure of continuity, and my years of experience, as I refer to, will help steer the organization through these challenging times. And, you know, as I mentioned to Councilmember Henderson, help to strengthen the organization to withstand future crises. And so that's why, you know, one of the things I'll say, you know, in my past research as an academic, cities and city public finance was one of the areas of my interest. And so what has happened, I mean, just being a part of the district renaissance to me has been, you know, if I may use it, has been a thrill. And I, you know, just want to continue to be a part of that.
Okay. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. But staying along that line of questioning, again, you've worked at the OCFO in some capacity for more than 20 years. And I don't want to understate my appreciation for your public service. That's no small thing, and that's important for our consideration of your nomination. And while I think there is a benefit to that, some people might see some aspect of your long tenure as a liability and perhaps not being innovative and perhaps maybe some bit of inertia and complacency setting in. How would you respond to any critiques that would suggest that the district needs, even in this interim, sort of just to fulfill the remainder of this term, that the district needs somebody from the outside, somebody who's innovative, somebody who perhaps brings a different experience than what you bring? How would you respond to that potential criticism?
And, you know, that's a reasonable criticism, but the flip side of that is also continuity. As I have said, what my predecessors have done over the years is build a foundation that, you know, the year when I came on board, the control board was still here and shortly. And so people coming in not understanding the history of the district and, you know, risk taking. I mean, I'm not sure that should be a part of financial operations. We've seen how risk taking has done on Wall Street. But I think the benefit of continuity, I mean, I can't stress the importance of continuity and building the foundation, and then just knowing the history of where we're coming from. And as I said, my predecessors have also built this culture of continuous improvement. So, you know, we're always looking at, so we're here now, how can we improve? And you've seen that, you know, you mentioned, and I know you'll get back to this, about modernizing, for example, the tax system. We're looking at now modernizing the infra. So all of these things are initiatives that recognize that we can't be complacent. And one of the things I have stressed is that I would like to be able to build the organization to not just keep doing, you know, we want to keep doing what we're doing, but also to build on that to ensure that we're resilient against future crises.
Thank you for that response. Let me squeeze in one last question before I turn it over to Councilmember Silverman. But, you know, again, along those lines, given how long you've been there, let me just be clear for the record. When did you begin your service with the district? What year was that?
In 2001.
2001, okay. So the control board was still there. So given how long you've been in the office of the chief financial officer in different capacities, Could you perhaps, have you observed some areas where of weakness, some areas besides technology where there needed to be some improvements within the Office of the Chief Financial Officer that you've identified in your time? It can be recent, it can be early on. I'm just curious if you've observed some areas that outside of technology required some sort of improvements because they were deficient or weak or not as strong as you think they should have been. Give me an example or multiple examples if you can.
So,
and then I'll turn it to
the biggest challenge I see, as I alluded to earlier, is making sure that our residents and the taxpayers of the district have great customer service experience. And since my time here, and we have regular meetings, and you've pointed out there's a lot of complaints about how we administer tax service and people are not satisfied. And you heard the testimony from Ms. Tavares today about. So those are areas that we recognize, and not just me. We have recognized this, with my predecessor. And it's work we're always going to continue working on to the point where when people come to the tax office and they leave, they will have good experience. You've also mentioned, and I know Councilmember Silverman will get back, the challenges in terms of when we do fiscal impact statements and people's perception. And I would say a lot of the time, I would say it's more a perception than it's a reality. But doing fiscal impact statements is very challenging because, oftentimes, it's completely new policy where even when we call around to other jurisdictions, they have not had that experience, and so getting information is difficult. So inevitably we're going to be wrong on something. But what I can tell you is that we do strive for independence and making an estimate that we think is going to be reasonable. And I will assure you, whenever we are wrong, we will admit that we got this wrong because the data we have was either flawed or the assumptions we made were flawed, but we do admit that. But those are areas where I said a customer service experience and, making sure people be more transparent about how we develop our fiscal impact statements.
Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate using the word independence as a part of your response. I think it is extraordinarily important. And, just as a member of the 13-member council, and knowing how the CFO's position evolved over time in the control board and looking at the Attorney General's office and how important it is to maintain independence, even when agencies like the CFO work so closely with the executive. It is an independent entity, and it's vital to maintain that independence and not be an extension of any particular executive official or agency director. So Councilmember Silverman.
Yes, let me continue on this line of questioning. So thank you, Councilmember McDuffie. I do want to echo, I think, some sentiments that Councilmember McDuffie just expressed, and certainly Councilmember Henderson expressed, that I think executive agencies often use the fiscal impact statement as a way not to do things, to create an impediment for legislation and for improvement, I think sometimes. It seems like no matter what I propose, that legislation needs like 25 FTEs and a small army to implement. And I just don't think that's true. So let me ask you this, again, in problem solving mode, or perhaps continuous improvement mode that I know the CFO embraces. Does your office do reviews, let's say a year, or could the CFO do a yearly review of, okay, here's all the fiscal impact statements we did, here's the legislation that actually passed, and here's what the agency actually needed and is using right now? Because my sense, and I understand what you're saying, Dr. Lee, I see your point of view. Some of these things are new and there's really It's a guessing game. But I guess I'm going to make a hypothesis that perhaps some agencies might be more resistant to change than others. And we might see a trend that, well, certain agencies seem to always overestimate the number of FTEs, as you know, in their the FISs for bills that might impact them as opposed to some other agencies. And again, so we can make adjustments. So would you be willing to do that, like a yearly review of fiscal impact statements, you know, for bills that became law, what the agencies actually needed to do that policy or program, and what the FIS was?
No, thanks for the question. And that's, you know, one thing I'll say is that we do that for some, you know, really big bills that we've that has consequences going forward. And, you know, I'll cite one, which I know you're interested in, was a paid family leave bill, where we did go and revisit and see what our assumptions and what the actual was. And I know as a part of legislation, you put in that we do that regular review. But what I'll say in terms of your idea is an interesting one. And I would, this is something, frankly, I would have to discuss with ORA in terms of just the capacity that they have, because, you know, as, you know, this time of the year, we start with, we're going from the mayor's budget that they're working on. And, you know, I'll say this to you, and Chairman McDuffie mentioned it, that we work with the executive when they're preparing the budget. And once the budget gets to the council, you know, we switch resources and we're working with the council on providing, and that's part of the independence. So we do work with both sides. But it is something that would be interesting to explore. And I know at my time there, we were looking at this as a part of our after action review, and we never put it into just going back and looking, and where we can, because there's some places where we can get additional information on what happened, and then others. But that would be something, because frankly it would improve our process as well. So well, we would be,
you know, I would be interested, my staff will be interested in working with you on this. And I will say, it doesn't have to be tied to the calendar year or the fiscal year. That review could happen in a slower period of the year for the CFO, because what we just want to do is a look back. It's basically an audit. Okay, here's what the agency said they needed. Here's actually what they needed. So I don't think it needs to be tied to the beginning of a year or fiscal year or so forth. So look forward to working with you on that. Okay,
well, that's something I'll discuss. Go ahead.
Terrific. So let's change topics to one in which I think your predecessors can take full credit for, and you can come with clear eyes and a full heart, so you can't lose. And that is sports betting. Okay, so I think it's safe to say that all of the assumptions that the previous CFO made about sports betting were completely off and wrong. You know, there is an article in the press every month, especially as more states approve sports betting and our neighbors implement sports betting, that DC's program is just an abject disaster. So here's my question to you. As I said, you can let the previous regime take full responsibility for that disaster. But now you are going to be CFO. So what do we do here? Are you thinking of reconsidering the current model for sports betting, of having the lottery run the program, or do you think we should go to a market-driven model that our neighbors have? Let me start there.
So before I get to that question, I'll go back to your premise that remember, I was the chief economist at the time we developed, and I was part and parcel of making that estimate. So, you know, if there's any culpability, I'm a part of it. So I can't distance myself from that. But I'm
trying to distance you.
So you, I'm just being honest here that I was, but the premise of your question is that we have made an assessment that it has failed. And I must say, I don't agree with that, only because part of the model that we had was that it would be casual bettors or people who were commuters who are coming into the district. And unfortunately for us, we implemented sports betting right at the time the pandemic hit. And so we have not really had a chance to evaluate whether that model has failed or not. We just
Let me pause you there, though. This is,
Sure.
again, so we made an assumption, and for circumstances beyond our control, I hear you, that assumption was wrong. But the point is that we wanted to be early entrants into the market to get ahead of our neighbors, right? And create a behavioral pattern that, you know, commuters would use our app to bet. But now, and I think both Virginia and Maryland have implemented sports betting now. So those folks, you know, half of our working population and there's an unknown of whether they're going to commute back to our city, isn't using our app. And then, but if you look at your revenue estimates, a lot of our residents aren't using it either. I mean, our revenues are, I'm not looking at them, but they are incredibly off. And meanwhile, our neighbors and everyone else who's doing sports betting and using, you know, the apps from DraftKings and so forth, almost everyone else has taken a different approach, and they're getting a lot of revenue from it. So my thought would be, shouldn't we change the model, given that our assumptions were wrong? Some of that might have been out of our control, but people aren't going to change their behavior back to pre-COVID, you know. So shouldn't we change our program in response?
So again, what I'll emphasize, two things. One, as I said, and you're right, we don't know what the level of the commuter population will be going forward. But the second aspect of that is that we did have a slow rollout of the app, and that has had an impact. But we just hired a new lottery director, and one of the criteria was having both experience in marketing and in implementing technology. And over the last months, we have been rolling out different aspects of it. So, and then the other thing I'll say to you is that part of the model is that with the private sports bettor, all we get is a 10% tax on the handle. And the premise of our assumptions is that if the district is operating it, we would get all the profits. So they have their profits that's separate from what we're getting. And when we did the calculation, it was that getting all the profits would benefit the district more. As I said, we have not had a chance to test that yet. And so my response to you, first of all, is that, you know, how we move forward with it is a matter for the mayor and the council. And the second part of it, I would say, is that it's too early to tell whether that model has failed in terms of generating more revenues than on the long. Because remember, in the end, what we're interested in is the long-term viability of this approach. And if you ask me the question that in the long term, when we've reached steady state, will the private operators, because remember, the private operators are competing vigorously against each other. That's going to reduce the profit from each. And so
I'm out of time,
might not see
Dr. Lee,
the 10%, sure.
But what I would just say is people are using the private operator apps. So our benefit would be getting that 10% revenue fee, or perhaps we could increase it a little bit. But I think we have to adjust to what the behavior is, which is people are using the private operator apps to sports bet. And, you know, where the revenues, they're not going to use our app. They're using those. They're going to use them whether they're in the district, Virginia, or Maryland. So let's just collect the revenue from people using those. But I'm out of time. I think there might be another round. Is that correct, Mr. McDuffie? Okay, so I'm going to return
Indeed,
to the lottery in the next round. Thank you.
Yeah, Yeah, I appreciate that, Councilmember Silverman. We're going to be. I've still got questions and plan to ask some about lottery, so we can keep going until we to exhaust those. Again, I want to talk, and I'm talking with my staff. I do want to make sure I'm not turning this roundtable on your nomination to performance, but I think this is so tied to this question of your nomination that we've got to delve into some of these things, and I appreciate you being here to answer these questions. I have some that I want to ask about operations of the OCFO, and I've got some, as I mentioned, about lottery as well. So Councilmember Silverman, we will definitely do another round. So in November of 2021, Dr. Lee, the Office of the DC Auditor sent a letter to me and Chairman Mendelson summarizing findings and recommendations from earlier Office of the Auditor's audits directed at the OCFO. The findings and recommendations suggest a wide range of issues, from weak or missing standard operating procedures to a lack of compliance with regulations and laws, as well as accounting irregularities, inefficient and wasteful spending, and poor record keeping. And I pulled that language directly from that report of the auditor. Lack of compliance with requirements for special purpose revenue funds, performance-based budget, et cetera. The CFO has the statutory authority and responsibility to provide direct control over the financial operations of each district agency. Through its various audits, the auditor's office identified a general lack of compliance that resulted in wasteful and inefficient use of district funds. The auditor suggests the OCFO should assert its independence, getting back to that line of question earlier about the independence. And the auditor suggests that the OCFO should assert its independence to provide oversight of each district agency's expenditures to ensure compliance with budget authority, grant requirements, payroll taxes, and withholding. So I want to give you the opportunity. How does OCFO engage with district agencies about their financial management and operation?
So first of all, Mr. Chairman, I thanks for the question. And I want to say we take all audits seriously. And we do work cooperatively with the auditor staff throughout each audit. And as the report shows, I mean, if you look at the table at the end of the report, we implemented most of the auditor's recommendations. And for the audits where we did not implement the recommendation, we specify in great detail in a written response to the auditor as to why not. Now, in terms of your question about the independence, we do, we always say to our AFOs that they have a thankless job, because in a sense, they're serving two masters. In the one, we want them to be of service in terms of advisors to agency staff, to ensure that when those agencies are making decisions in terms of spending, that they have the full information to make those decisions. So part of their is service, and as advisor, as you would in any organization, you'd have the CFO that advises on financial matter. On the other hand, as you mentioned, we're an independent agency, and one of the task or the function of the CFO is the agency fiscal officer is to say no, and we do that more often than, again, you will see, because we do this in private. We'll say, no, that can't be done. And we not only, just as we do with fiscal impact statements, as you probably experienced, we not only just say no, we also work and say, how can we accomplish what you would like to accomplish, but accomplish it in a way that does not impair the financial integrity of the district. And so that's the manner that we train and recruit. And when we're recruiting, that's that we we emphasize this dual role of the CFO, as on the one hand as an advisor, but on the other hand to be there as an independent voice that stop anything that might impair the financial integrity of the district. You're on mute, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about special purpose revenue funds. In particular, though, do you have any concerns, or do you think there's a need to consider improvements to the administration and oversight around special purpose revenue funds?
So, what I say, and this is kind of my personal belief, and you talk about stuff that I've observed in my 20 years here, and even when I was in the office, again, and this comes strictly from an academic background, that the best policy in terms of is not to have special purpose funds and to have everything, being in one pot so that you can have the maximum resources for budgeting. What inevitably happens with special purpose fund is that you're trying to match the spending with some agency and with a resource, and there are times when that resource generates revenue up and much beyond what it's what the agency needs to run the operation, and so you end up with a fund balance. And you mentioned about revenue forecasts that leave funds unspent. But the same thing happens as a result of special purpose fund that, and then there's the downside of that too. And I've been in the district long enough to see places where agencies that depend solely on special purpose fund, the fund, something happens and the fund didn't materialize. And so then it becomes spending pressure. So those are the problems you'll have with a special purpose fund. But to the extent that the mayor and the council decide to have them, I would say, in terms of oversight, we as the CFO make sure a part of that agencies are staying within the resources available with those funds, and then at the end of the year to make sure that we actually do a special purpose fund report that looks at the authority and review those over time. So I think from a CFO point of view,
speaking of those reports, though.
Pardon?
Speaking of those, and I've got a slight lag, so pardon, I appear to be interrupting you while you're talking. I thought you had actually stopped, so I got a little lag in my computer. But speaking of, you mentioned the SPR report, the SPR fund report. Talk about the OCFO's decision not to implement the auditor's recommendation that OCFO include in its SPR fund report fund expenditures, percentage of revenue spent each year, and sweep amounts.
So with that, part of that I think was, a matter of resources that we have to go, because I can tell you again, I was part of ORI when we were doing, and it's a really big task putting together that report on a timely basis. It is a challenge, and so, but I do believe as a part of the oversight, we do show what expenditure each year. I mean, and we do put out a report showing those. It is not a part of the report per se, but we do it as a part of the budget every year to look at what expenditure, what are the balances, and we have to do that because both the mayor and the council make decisions about what the budget will be for those agencies based on that report. So we do it's not in the special purpose fund report, because as we had a discussion with council member earlier about trying to do an after action report, it takes a tremendous amount of time to put these reports together. And so we usually do it after the budget is finished. So we do the ones that could affect the budget in terms of the expenditures and the balances at the time. So it is an actionable report that the mayor and the council can use.
So I appreciate that. you should be prepared during performance to talk a little bit more about some of the auditor recommendations. And I don't think I'm going to get into it right here for the purposes of this roundtable on your nomination, but I want to talk about, the mismanagement of the Housing Reduction Trust Fund, school modernization, program overspending. The auditor had some interesting insights as well as recommendations with how the OCFO might institute some safeguards around these things. And so I'll make sure that my staff engages with yours, because I'd like you to be prepared to respond to some of those recommendations by the auditor at that point during oversight on performance. But I'm not going to go into it right now. I do want to go into my last remaining time before I turn to Councilmember Silverman's final round. Pick up on the lottery. And as you know, it's a subordinate office of the OCFO, and your office has the authority to appoint the heads of subordinate offices, and after consultation with the mayor and the council, as required in the code, you can appoint someone to the Office of Lottery and Gaming, or OLG for short. The new director, Suarez, started in September of 2021. And most recently, OLG has been the subject of extensive criticism over both the rollout of the sports wagering program and the Gambit app, as well as the terms and monitoring of its contract with Intralot. Councilmember Silverman touched on that in her last line of questioning. Your predecessor was a huge supporter of sports wagering and really was the champion for urging the council to launch it quickly and be first to market before Maryland and Virginia rolled out their programs. So I want to give you another opportunity, though, to talk about why you think the program continues to fall way short of expectations. Really, the COVID, I've heard it before. It came up in performance and budget last year when the committee had oversight of OLG. Sure, COVID, impacted the program. But when you look at other jurisdictions and how they're faring and compare that to how we're doing, COVID only impacted the program so much, and there's got to be some accountability for where the agency and its contractors fell short, rather than simply pointing the finger to COVID. As I recall it, I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but they're actually in the red in terms of revenues when we did oversight last year. And I don't think any estimate that the CFO provided said that the program would be in the red. And that's a problem. And so I want to give you an opportunity again to talk about what the estimates were, the expectations for this program, and what specifically, if you have suggestions on how the Office of Lottery and Gaming needs to improve to we see better revenues and better competition with what other jurisdictions are doing with their programs.
And, let me say, first of all, that, as you said, when at the oversight hearing with the lottery director, we'll provide much more detail as to the program and, what will be rolling out over the year and how we believe we will be able to improve the revenue in that score. But coming back to this COVID, I don't think we're using COVID. It's not an excuse. It's a reality, and here's why. So you mentioned the other private operator. The premise of our sports wagering app was that it would target the casual bettor. So we would, in terms of the amount of payout percentage would be lower, because we would just target the person who is the target of the private operator are professional bettors, people who have a deeper knowledge of what's the game, what are the odds, and that was always the premise, that we know that they were going to target these, and so they will thrive wherever they are in terms of getting those bettors. But the promise, I would say, of the district's app was to get at the casual better. And that in turn depended really on having a large commuter population that could, they would be able to put in the casual bed, even if they're not able to be in their respective jurisdiction. And that is where the COVID impact, that in terms of our target population, we have not been able to get to those. And that is why it's, if you compare us to the private bettors, they're doing better. And they would have, just because they're getting at the hardcore better, and our target population has not been there. And as I said, at the oversight, we're going to show part of the hiring of Mr. Suarez for sure was his experience. I mean, he came from a jurisdiction where they had sports betting, and he, was a part, so he understands that. He also has background in technology and marketing. And as we speak, we've started rolling out different with we also are rolling out in some of our partners, new devices where people can actually do the betting. And then the other part that we don't get at with the operator is that the ability to integrate communities, small businesses that are in the district with the sports, to incorporate them into the sports wagering market. And so that's another thing that, I don't know how you get that with the private operator. And this is why I said we probably have to wait.
Some people will say, and I'm going to give, Councilman, just so you know, I'm going to give you 10 minutes for your last round. We had some issues with the clock. So, but some people will say, Dr. Lee, that it was the fact that we didn't do competitive mobile, right? Which is really a decision that I think rested on the insights from the CFO's office and the estimates and what the return would be to the district by not doing competitive mobile. And so, I'm gonna let you respond to that. And then I also wanna throw this out there too, because this is important to me as a member of the council, and particularly the member that has oversight of the OCFO and the Office of Lottery and Gaming. A lot of people were actually surprised to learn that the new executive director of the lottery had been appointed. And I say that because the DC code says that the CFO shall appoint the heads of certain subordinate offices, including the lottery, after consultation with the mayor and the council. I wasn't consulted. I don't know if any other members of the council were consulted, but I was not consulted prior to the appointment of Mr. Suarez. And so I'd like to hear from you, and I think this goes to your nomination, like, how do you describe those interactions with the council and the mayor when it comes to those types of appointments? And how can we ensure that the hiring process for heads of OCFO subordinate offices are going to be more transparent moving forward?
So first of all, I just want to describe a bit about how that, and it's not very different from how we hire any other CFO executive. And what we did in the case of the lottery director is that we conducted a nationwide search. We reached out to the directors and deputy directors of the 47 lotteries in North America. And we conducted 4 levels of review. And our focus in the selection was the experience with systems implementation and innovation, experience in growing a brand and increasing sales. So those were all, and Mr. Suarez met all of these criteria, and that was you were selected. And in terms of how, our interpretation of the independent personnel for the CFO is that the CFO appoints the executives, all the CFO executive, and we do inform in writing both the council, the mayor and the council, and offers for council member to meet and talk to the lottery director.
I
also want to say
let me
that process is not very different from what we did in the previous appointment of lottery director.
Because the previous appointment happened prior to my chairmanship, and I wasn't involved at that level. But I read the code to say that the appointment happens after consultation with the mayor and the council. In this case, the appointment happened before consultation, at least with me, or in my understanding, any members of the council. So even if the process reflected a process that was similar to what had happened in the past, I read the code in the plain language of the code to say that the consultation is supposed to happen prior to, or the appointment is supposed to happen after consultation with the mayor and council. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I think, while I think it's important that the office maintain its independence, I'd like to see that independence be consistent. And so not simply when it comes to consultation with the council, it should be independent with its interactions with the executive and the various agencies as well, particularly when it comes to fiscal impact statements. And so I wanted to put that on the record. And I'll give you an opportunity to respond, but I want to ask one final question before I turn to Councilmember Silverman, which really speaks to the metrics that the OCFO uses to measure the effectiveness of the Office of Lottery and Gaming and its director. What do you all use to determine whether these folks are doing a good job?
So, I mean, for us, the bottom line is the lottery exists solely to have a transfer to the district to help in terms of the district finances. And if you ask me, that would be the metric. What are we doing to enhance the transfer to the district coffers? And, any director that is hired, that is the goal that we set, that the goal should be to increase the revenues to the district to help support important priorities.
Okay, I appreciate it. I'm sure I'm well over my time, so I'm going to turn to Councilmember Silverman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember McDuffie. I want to continue asking about the lottery. And as you may recall, Dr. Lee, I objected to how we did sports betting. I thought that there should be a competitive bid both for sports betting and for the lottery contract. And my concern about the lottery contract is that everything I understood from your predecessor and from Ms. Bresnahan at the time was that we need to modernize our lottery because scratch tickets, though, and I know that your predecessor had lots of headaches over those, are a thing of the past. And that in order to generate the revenue that you want, or to see the lottery as a good revenue generator, taking morality out of it, we need to make it digital. We need to have the ability for those who play the lottery to do it on their phone, because they're not going to the Giant anymore to buy scratch tickets. So it doesn't appear that our contractor is doing that. Intravelot has been slow to modernize the lottery. So how do you, this is a different version of Councilmember McDuffie's question, what role do you play as CFO in oversight over the lottery, in making sure that our vendor is optimizing the lottery as much as possible? Or is the CFO now taking the view that they've given up? I mean, because our revenues keep declining in the lottery. So, it is not a good revenue generator. So should we just give up the lottery perhaps? What do you think?
So
Oh,
first of all, no, we have not given up. And in fact,
okay.
we did launch iLottery, which is the digital version of the lottery, in last December. And you ask about oversight. As you know, the lottery director is a direct report to the CFO. So the CFO does have oversight. And so far in terms of the iLottery, we're still having positive transfers to the district. So I would say we have not given up. And, I will admit in terms of the sports wagering, there was some delay. I mean, quite apart from COVID, there were some delays in the rollout of the app. But all of that, we're pressing the vendor, to meet all our deliverables and to make sure that we're doing it on a time scale where we will be competitive with what's out there. So all of that is going on. And the answer to your question is no, we have not given up, and we're pressing on. One of the reasons, as I mentioned, we hired Mr. Suarez because he has experience in that department. He knows about technology and innovation and digital lotteries. And I know we have weekly meetings to discuss this, and he's pressing ahead with pushing the vendor to fulfill the promises that were made in terms of delivering. As I said, the bottom line for us is more revenues, as you said. And so, we want to reach to a point when we are seeing that revenue grow and not shrink. And that's where we're pushing towards.
But we have not seen that revenue grow, is my point. And we have the same vendor that we've had for a while. I can't quite remember how long Intralot has had it. I think they've had it since at least 2011, perhaps. So I get what it doesn't appear, over that time, the lottery's revenues have declined. So Intralot hasn't proven to be a very good partner in increasing our revenue. So something has to change, it seems to me. And just going digital,
and those are the changes we're
everyone's going
establishing.
digital. So that's like a basic of operating a lottery at this point.
No, that's true. I mean, that's a fair point. I mean, for years, for example, the district was the only one that did Mega Millions. Everybody started doing that, so it became more competitive. So even, I mean, this is prior to COVID. But one thing I'll say is that we do see lottery revenues fall during recessionary time, and this is time honored. Every recession where I've been here, it has gone down, and then it has rebounded as we emerge from the recession. And in fact, I will say our lottery revenues are currently growing. They're just not growing as fast as we had anticipated. And as I said, we're pushing plans forward to roll out all the different products associated around both iLottery and sports wagering to ensure that we start seeing that increase. And as a Councilmember McDuffie, is something that we'll go into details in those programs during oversight hearing time.
Okay. Perhaps I'll participate in that hearing, though I was not honored to be on Councilmember McDuffie's committee. But I'll just point out to you, Dr. Lee, that my staff pulled the numbers. In 2001, the proceeds from the lottery were 84 million, and now we're at about half of that. So there's been a pretty precipitous drop. And that is continued over time. Let me switch to probably what will be my final question. So especially at the beginning of the pandemic, your predecessor talked about how he has meetings, regular meetings with business leaders to discuss the state of the district's economy. And certainly I understand the need to do that. He wants to meet with the hospitality industry to understand changes and impact on our sales tax. That's sensible to me. But it is a limited view of what's going on in our economy and in our city. So as CFO, would you be open to having regular monthly meetings with, let's say, other groups, perhaps housing advocates or, those who are engaged in the social safety net programs we have, to sort of get a more fulsome view of what is happening in the district and to working people in the district?
No, definitely. And as you know, council member, we used to have regular standing meeting with the fiscal policy group.
Yes, I missed
And
those.
participated annually when all those other groups, we would present matters on the budget and hear their feedback. So that is something I am definitely open to doing.
Okay, great. Well, I guess I'll use my last couple minutes just to sum up. First, I look forward to working with you, Dr. Lee. I find you to be a delightful person to work with. But I do want to work with you and hold you accountable on certain things we talked about, these after action reviews. I'd love to find a way for us to work together on taking a look back at fiscal impact statements. I think there will be a lot of interest in that from my colleagues. I'd also be interested in further understanding, adjustments that would be made to the revenue estimates. And then finally on, the lottery, I just think that we made a big mistake. And I think my colleagues know that I believe that. And if we are going to get revenue from, I don't have a moral view of this. I have a revenue generating view, which is if we're going to generate revenue and use it to pay for violence interruption or housing programs or whatever we choose to use it for, then it needs to be a competitive program with our neighbors. So we need to have a sports betting program. And I will just say my final comment on sports betting that, we do have visibility into how much money, how much revenue Ted Leonsis is making at the Capital One Arena. And I think he just has an exclusive arrangement with MGM and charges like a fee basically. And he's collecting that fee and he's making a lot of money. So I think that shows that private operator model might make sense. So I look forward to working with you and thank you very much for your time today. Thank you, Councilmember McDuffie.
And thank you, Councilmember, and I do look forward to working with you going forward. Thanks again.
Thank you, Councilmember Silverman, and as well to Councilmember Henderson. Dr. Lee, thank you for your testimony today and your willingness to serve as the district's CFO. As I mentioned, so that concludes my questions. And as I mentioned previously, there's some things that I think are better suited to bring up during performance oversight, but I want to preview them for you. The auditor had some recommendations around the mismanagement of the Housing Reduction Trust Fund, as well as school modernization program overspending that we're going to bring up, and we'll make sure that the team on the committee reaches out to your team to make sure that you have a sense of what we're going to be asking so you can be prepared to answer that during performance oversight. The Office of Lottery and Gaming, obviously the Director Suarez should be prepared to answer questions during performance, but similarly, I'm going to bring up some of this during the performance of the OCFO during the oversight as well. And then there were some things that DCBIA, their CEO, Liz DeBarros, raised in her support of your nomination. They did outline some concerns and or goals around several things. And so I'll be asking about those as well during performance, assuming you'll have some updates for the committee at that point. So again, thank you for your willingness to serve. Thank you for your service over the years. And that concludes this roundtable on the Chief Financial Officer of the District of Columbia Fitzroy Lee Confirmation Resolution of 2021, which is PR 24-389. The committee will convene next on February 2nd for its first fiscal year 2021-2022 performance oversight hearing on Destination DC, Events DC. The time is now 2:07 p.m. and this roundtable is adjourned. Thank you. And thank you to the staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.